good, y'all, man? We back with another video, man. How you doing? We're doing great today, man. Today we got top 5 coldest cases finally solved in 2022. It's gonna be the end of 2022, and like they finally got solved this year. But we finna see what happened. See all the cases that have been solved. Get to the video, man.
"2022 has been a banner year for new investigative and DNA identification techniques. Dozens upon dozens of cold cases and other scary mysteries have been solved thanks to new science and technology. After decades, justice has finally been carried in the cases of these unsolved mysteries." Number 5. U.S. Army Corporal Tommy T. Hanks, age 27, fought for the U.S. Army during the Korean War. In late 1950, Tommy's regiment, the 24th Infantry with Company E, 2nd Battalion, 25th Infantry Division, 8th Army, was stationed near Onju, North Korea. While the unit was withdrawing from their position, Tommy was separated from the other men. He was reported missing in action and he was never seen again. He left behind his wife and 3 children. On January 16, 1956, Tommy was declared non-recoverable. The location of his remains.
Do you love getting high, but smoking hurts your life?
He was like, did he intend to lead the group? Did he intend to lead the group, or like did he just like lost him or something?
What happened to him became a real-life cold case mystery. In late 2022, though, this cold case was finally solved, thanks to a new frontier and international cooperation. In 2018, after a summit between the US President and North Korean Supreme Leader, the North Korean government turned over 55 boxes that it claimed contained the remains of American service members killed during the war. On August 1st, 2018, this unusual crime scene evidence was turned over to law enforcement at the Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam in Hawaii. Military scientists used multiple forms of analysis, including isotope analysis, autosomal and Y chromosome DNA, and circumstantial evidence to identify Tommy's remains. The mystery case was finally solved on August 2nd, 2022, and the military announced that Tommy would be buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. It was thanks to major advances in scientific research and DNA technology, as well as the landmark cooperation of the North Korean government, that Tommy's family finally received closure and the mystery of his whereabouts was solved decades later. There are approximately 7,600 American victims of the Korean War who are still unaccounted for, even to this day, and breakthroughs such as this one inspire hope for thousands of others. Number 4. In May of 1988, a couple from Owenton, Kentucky, were out on a walk when they spotted a real-life horror story. An unresponsive woman lying alongside a rural road. The woman was wearing nothing but a pair of brown men's socks, and she'd been laid or placed in a patch of tall grass. The couple quickly reported this scary mystery to local police, who recovered a number of clothing items near the site of this discovery, including a pair of white tennis shoes, blue jeans, and a brown blouse. The woman did not have any identification with her, and she'd passed away a few days prior to being found. Foul play was suspected. The woman's fingerprints were taken, but there was no match in law enforcement files. Her identity was unknown. Meanwhile, just a few hundred miles north, Linda Bennett's family reported her missing to investigators in Columbus, Ohio. Her family did not live nearby, and they were only in limited touch with Linda, but they were concerned that she'd completely lost contact. Columbus was where she was last known to be living. Because Linda was reported missing in a different state, and the date she was reported missing was after the body in Kentucky was found, the two were not initially considered a match. In fact, it wasn't for more than 30 years that the cold case was finally solved, and the Jane Doe from Owen County, Kentucky was confirmed to be Linda. Not much information has been posted online about Linda's life,
30 years
and
to
how she
solve a
came to be
mystery,
an
bro?
unidentified victim in Kentucky is still a mystery. She was 38 when she passed away, and was a mother of at least one child, a son. It was her son who proved instrumental in finally identifying her all these years later, thanks to the advent of genetic genealogy. Crime scene investigators sent DNA evidence from Owen County Jane Doe to scientists at Othram Labs, who developed a genetic profile for the woman. This profile was then used to narrow down a potential match that could have been Jane Doe's son, and DNA testing confirmed her identity. The news was released to the public in December of 2022. Although Jane Doe is finally reconnected to her name, the mystery of her case is still unsolved. Anyone with information about what may have happened to Linda Bennett is encouraged to call Detective Johnson of the Kentucky State Police at 502-532-6363 and reference agency case number 0588-0277. Number 3. On January 11th, 1980, Mark Madger's life became a real-life horror story. He arrived home from work at approximately 5 p.m. to find that his young wife, Nadine, had been brutally attacked and left on the dining room floor. She did not survive the attack, but the couple's infant son, Dan, was unharmed in his playpen. 25-year-old Nadine had no known enemies, and the identity and motive of the perpetrator was a scary mystery. Law enforcement concluded that the attack had taken place between 1:15 p.m. and 4.
I don't fight for myself.
4:45 p.m. that same afternoon. Nadine had suffered more than 40 stab wounds, which were inflicted by a carving knife that had been in the
imagine
Madger.
just somebody just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 40 times, bro. Just man, that's not, bro. You gotta get sick, bro. Ain't no way. Man.
Kitchen. Nothing had been stolen from the home, and there were no signs of forced entry. The perpetrator left behind very little crime scene evidence. However, drops of blood from an unknown male were recovered from Nadine's shirt. This would become instrumental in finally solving the cold case files decades in the future.
Once they get your blood, but
Advanced DNA testing and genetic genealogy meant that investigators could finally solve this horrifying cold case in 2022. In the late 2010s, police were able to retest the DNA collected from Nadine's clothing to build a more thorough profile of an unknown assailant. From there, they traced the individual's ancestry and developed a family tree that led them to the biological children of the attacker. It was this child who provided their DNA and confirmed a match. Nadine's killer was Stephen Joseph Simcak, a resident of Eastlake, Ohio, who, as far as Nadine's family knows, did not know her personally. Stephen passed away in 2018 and was unable to be held accountable for his crimes. He had no criminal record and had lived a quiet life as an electrician and a florist. In 1980, Stephen had missed only one day of work at his job, the day of Nadine's murder. He had called in sick. Nadine's late husband, Mark, spoke with reporters in 2022 when Stephen's identity was uncovered, and he said, quote, "I thought Nadine's killer would never be found. He was a thief, a coward, a liar, and a murderer. He concealed the truth so no one would know what he did. Nadine did not know Stephen or had anything to do with him. She did not deserve this." Although Stephen's identity has been revealed, the Willoughby Police Department continued to work the case in an attempt to gather information and understand the motive. Police have asked anyone with information to call the department's Detective Bureau at 440-953-4210. Number 2. Carl Isaacs Jr. was born and raised in Delavan, Wisconsin. According to a childhood friend named Marsha Harris Johnson, he was a goofball who could make everyone laugh. Marsha and Carl went to school together from 6th through 12th grades, but after they graduated, the pair drifted apart. Life got busy for them both, and a few short years later, when he was just 20 years old, Carl vanished for good. His story was just another of life's scary mysteries for more than 20 years, until 2022, when the cold case file of what happened to Carl was finally closed and put to rest. Carl was a young man, but he had an extensive arrest record and a history of brushes with the law. Since junior high, he had struggled with substances, but by the time he was 17 in 1991, Carl was involved in a string of drug and alcohol-fueled burglaries. Carl was tried as an adult for his crimes and sentenced to serve 5 years, including in a substance abuse program and in prison. By 1995, he was allowed to be at home on electronic monitoring. However, according to reports, Carl was estranged from his mother and spent as little time at home as possible, often staying on the streets. On April 16th of 1995, a state-appointed official who supervised his house arrest said that he'd vanished without authorization. Apart from this, Carl was never formally reported missing. On November 11th, 1995, a group of hunters found the remains of a young man in a rural area in Rock County, Wisconsin. The man was wearing military camouflage pants and a heavy metal t-shirt, and he had a unique necklace that had a ram's head pendant shaped out of a fork. He was thought to be between 17 and 20 years old, and it was estimated at the time that he had been in the woods for approximately a year. The man, who came to be known as the Rock County John Doe, was Carl Isaacs. However, at the time, crime scene investigators had no idea who the mysterious young man was. They canvassed high schools and rock concert parking lots with forensic sketches, hoping someone might recognize him. With no leads, though, Rock County John Doe became a cold case. In 2018, the Rock County Sheriff's Office partnered with the nonprofit DNA Doe Project to perform advanced DNA analysis on the remains. Researchers were able to identify 2 potential half-brothers of the man, which allowed them to conclusively identify the remains as belonging to Carl Isaacs. Shockingly, Carl had never formally been reported missing, and he had an active arrest warrant for violating his probation in 1995. The warrant had been judicially renewed up through 2018. The circumstances of Carl's death are not known and are still under investigation. Anyone with information on his passing.
It just say finally solved, bro. Why is it like what?
Or how he made.
Nah, I know it's not kept, man. He talking about finally solved. He talking about some call the police if you got any other
ended up in the
information.
woods is asked to contact the Rock County Sheriff's Office at 608-757-7911. Number 1. Thanks to a new interest in true crime, dozens of real-life mysteries have been solved because of a new attention on these strange but true stories. Such is the case in the story of Lynette Dawson, an Australian woman who was the subject of a popular podcast called Teacher's Pet. The podcast garnered tens of millions of listeners and drew increased attention to Lynette's case, ultimately resulting in a new conviction in 2022 for her 1982 killing. Lynette Dawson was a nurse and childcare worker who lived in Sydney, Australia with her husband, Chris, a PE teacher at a local high school. Lynette and Chris had been teenage sweethearts who married in 1970. The pair had 2 children, both daughters. Sometime in January of 1982, Chris told his children and loved ones that his wife had told him that she needed some time away from the family. 6 weeks later, he reported her missing. Lynette was never seen again. Chris wasn't left to raise his daughters alone, though. He had help from their live-in babysitter, a woman known as JC, who was a high school student of his. JC had a violent home life, and Chris had convinced Lynette that she needed to escape from her parents by moving into their home to finish high school. The plans were in the works when Lynette went missing, and JC moved in on January 10th or 11th of 1982, just days after Lynette reportedly called Chris and said that she wasn't coming home. But JC wasn't just a student. The 16-year-old was also Chris's young girlfriend, who he had groomed and would ultimately marry. In 1983, Chris divorced Lynette in absence and moved with JC to Queensland, Australia. However, in 1990, the marriage broke down and JC, now an adult, moved back to Sydney. She reached out to the police to tell them something bad may have happened to Lynette. In addition, she said that Chris had groomed her and treated her extremely poorly in the years that they had been married. Despite this, a full inquiry wasn't launched until 1997, and no physical evidence was discovered. Without solid proof that Chris was involved, Lynette's cold case languished. In 2018, the major publicity generated by the podcast was just the push the case needed to move forward. Although the evidence remained circumstantial, a judge reviewed the case facts, and in August...
That's one thing about America. They gon' once you pass and you slip it, they gonna try to monetize your name, boy. I ain't lying, boy.
Of 2022, Chris was found guilty of Lynette's murder, which took place on or about January 8th of 1982. The judge said that it was clear that Chris was infatuated with JC, to the point that he saw no other way to be with her than to kill Lynette. Thank you, guys.
And then some of these stuff wasn't even solved, bro. They talking about some solved mysteries, and some of them wasn't even solved. Anyways, man, but, hope you guys like the video, man. And yeah, bro. See y'all tomorrow, man.